Patients have to be viewed as the oncology community's ultimate partner. And it is in that context I'm very pleased to introduce our two speakers, both of whom are leaders in personalized medicine, Dr. Bill Dalton and Kathy Giusti, who will be participating in a fireside chat on maximizing collective impact to benefit patients. Bill Dalton serves as the founder and CEO of M2Gen, a health informatics solutions company focused on accelerating the discovery, development, and delivery of personalized medicine by aggregating and sharing data from multiple cancer centers around the country. And I'm told that this is a very easy assignment.
Piece of cake.
Before taking this role, he was the president and CEO of Moffitt Cancer Center from 2002 to 2012. And he was also the past chair of the Personalized Medicine Coalition. Kathy Giusti, a multiple myeloma patient, is the founder of the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation and currently serves on its board of directors. Since founding MMRF in 1998, Kathy has led the foundation in establishing collaborative research models in the areas of tissue banking, genomics, and clinical trials that are dramatically accelerating the pace at which life-saving treatments are brought to patients. In 2016, she was named co-chair of the Harvard Business School Kraft Precision Medicine Accelerator, a $20 million endowed program provided by Robert Kraft and the Kraft Family Foundation that aims to speed breakthroughs in precision medicine for all cancers. And Kathy told me earlier today she was the right person for this job because she has very little patience. So please join me in welcoming Bill Dalton and Kathy Giusti.
Thank you very much, Ed, and greetings to you all, and greetings, Kathy.
Thank you.
I get to have the fun part of asking Kathy questions and then listening to her answers, but I've been doing that for a long time already. Kathy is phenomenal. I know she needs no introduction, but I'm going to give you a little background here. In 1996, she was diagnosed with myeloma. Her response was, I'm in control, I've got it, here's what I'm going to do. So she creates in 1998 the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, one of the most powerful patient advocacy and research groups ever to be formed. And I won't go through all the things that she's done. We'd be here and time would disappear. But what I learned, I was fortunate to be involved with you early in that creation of the MMRF, is this was a person not only that was smart, but passionate. And this person also had a business background, which as an academician in medical science, that was a new phenomenon to me. But Kathy, in her leadership, brings in this culture of team science. How can she bring in different experts from different vocations even to create something even more powerful? And so this concept of, and her leadership of bringing in team science in this culture was phenomenal. And as you heard from Ed, she's now the co-chair of the Kraft Accelerator Precision in Precision Medicine. And I've been fortunate to participate with her in some of these roundtables that she's having. And I learned something new, which is I try to do almost every day, especially if I go to something that Kathy's leading. There is a business theory called the creating an ecosystem of shared value. And this is started by for-profits coming together to build something that neither industry or stakeholder could do alone. And they do it through collective impact, by coming together, what is it we're trying to do, and then coalesce on a common agenda. Well, that was a feature of a recent meeting that Kathy and her co-chair had. And I'm going to ask some questions regarding to that. So this, again, is a Harvard business theory that really wasn't built in medical science or healthcare, right, but it had a tremendous potential of application. Can you describe that for us, both in myeloma?
So what happened was one of the programs we were running up at Harvard Business School was featuring a gentleman named Mark Kramer. And you might want to write this name down because he has done beautiful work in understanding when the ecosystem is so broad and there are so many disparate groups within it, how do you work together to bring the ecosystem together to create much broader social change? And as Mark started going through this whole session at Harvard Business School with many of us that were in the healthcare sector, I remember thinking to myself, that's exactly what we just did in multiple myeloma. I just didn't name it collective impact, but it was exactly why multiple myeloma was so successful. So it was okay, I'm gonna step back and talk a little bit about, now I can look backward and say, how is collective impact used to change the world of one cancer and how we can change the world of many cancers? So when I was diagnosed with myeloma, I was 37. Back then I was told 3 years to live, that's it. There was nothing at all in the pipeline. But what I look at now, there are 5 areas of collective impact. And what we ended up doing was saying, I used my science and pharmaceutical company background to say, what's the common agenda of what we need in myeloma? And the truth was, and Bill remembers this because he was working in myeloma at the same time, was what's our common agenda was extending life. I mean, if we were only living 3 years, I know for me, I felt like if I could just live a few more, my 1-year-old daughter might remember me. But when the second piece comes in, the second piece is, what are the metrics that are going to drive you? Well, we had 0 drugs in the pipeline in myeloma, so our metrics were, how do we start to build a pipeline in this orphan cancer that nobody cares about? And then the third piece is coming up with mutually reinforcing activities that keeps your team together. So I took the ecosystem, and Bill was part of it at the Moffitt Cancer Center, and I said, okay, there's only a small group of academic centers working in this space. Let's start working together. We would do tissue banking together. Then once we had the tissue, I was reaching out to the NCI, the Broad Institute, saying, if I have tissue, can you help me doing genomic sequencing? And we became the first to sequence our genome, and this was years and years ago. And then because we didn't have drugs, I said, oh, how can I get the academic centers to play together, and can we form a clinical network starting with 4 centers? Today it's 25 centers strong, and we will help conduct the phase 1 and 2 studies so that we can bring and entice pharma to this little, uncommon cancer that nobody really cared about. So that became our mutually reinforcing activities. And then the fourth area that Mark Kramer always talks about is who's doing the communication. That was the MMRF. We communicated and brought everybody together in a consistent way. And what was the backbone? And again, that was the MMRF. We were the funder. We wrote the strategic plan. And so Bill and I can look back and say, it's many, many years later. I was faced 20 years with a fatal disease, given 3 years to live. And the reason that myeloma patients are doing so well, we've had 10 drugs approved in this disease, and we've tripled the lifespan of our patients, is because we used collective impact to bring the entire ecosystem together. And as Bill knows, we're nowhere near done because we still keep looking at this ecosystem and saying, there's 20% of our patients, 25% of our patients that die within the first 3 years. We consider them high risk. So now we start the whole process all over again, looking at those high risk patients and building programs like the COMPASS study.
Excellent. So the first and obviously primary stakeholder that's, if you will, in the center is the patients themselves.
Yep.
And as I heard the multiple stakeholders, you're talking about researchers.
Yep.
We're talking about pharma who are developing the new drugs. And so it is a coalition, if you will, of like-minded industry, but neither can do it themselves.
Right.
And we're hearing, obviously, this is about precision medicine. Mm-hmm. And precision medicine is understanding what the needs of a single patient, but in the consideration of the population of patients that look like that patient.
Yeah.
Well, to gather and build those kind of populations takes some major doing.
Yeah.
That takes following millions of patients throughout their lifetime. So again, with Vice President Biden's moonshot, it was all about how do we share? How do we share data? And so if you could speak to that, about how perhaps collective impact, where you have multiple stakeholders who could use the data, patients themselves, research, clinicians at the point of care, and even payers. Yeah. So can you speak to how the theory of, if you will, the creating this shared value ecosystem through collective impact might address the data?
We were frustrated in myeloma even 5 years ago that we were trying to get the academic centers to share their data on multiple myeloma, and it was a struggle, to be honest with you. We get it. It's the gold of publishing and things like this. So the MMRF had to invest $40 million into what we called the COMPASS study. And the COMPASS study is where we followed 1,000 myeloma patients from the moment of diagnosis. Every time they relapsed, we collected the data again. And this is a beautiful, pristine data set that is genomic, it is clinical, and it is longitudinal. But most importantly, when we launched it, we said you have to be willing to give up IP. All data goes into the public domain. And I'm going to get to how we broaden this out. But just to give you an example, I want to come back to the value side that was being discussed earlier this morning, which is our COMPASS data set is now maturing. So as the data comes in, we're able to look at these hypotheses that are being generated. So we can look at that data and say triplets look better than doublets. Transplant looks better than not. Certain drugs look better than others. We can say African Americans are doing a certain way when genomically they look a different way. But we have to be able to drive that data to the clinic. You know, we're not an organization that says having all the abstracts at ASCO and ASH is good enough. We want to drive it to the clinic. So an example is yesterday, GNS, who helps us with our data analytics, can come in and literally help us with all the algorithms to say, we actually think we can help you to decide which patients should get doublets, which patients should actually get transplant. And that's where we're trying to create more funding, where we bring more data in. If we don't have enough data in the COMPASS study, let's put the funding and resources out there to answer the question well and let people apply to us with a data set to make our data set stronger, with a data analytic company, with whatever it's going to take to drive a hypothesis to the clinic, because that's the most important thing we can do. And an example, working with someone like Bill who has data in the Orion network, if we have clinical data that matches where you are, we need to bring these data sets together. But once again, when you drive collective impact, I have to sit back and say, what are we trying to solve for now? Now we're trying to solve for how do we take data hypotheses and drive them to the clinic. How am I bringing the ecosystem together? How does it get funded? Some of the questions we're trying to answer are better supported by the payer. Should a patient stay on maintenance therapy or not? Some of them are better supported by academia. Is this target real or is it not? Pharma may care about that too. I'm much more about understanding the questions and then creating the funding and incentives to keep everybody working together to find the answers for the patients we serve and to find value wherever we can find it.
Excellent. So the data sharing concept and, in fact, building these information exchanges have really taken off. And what we're seeing, I think, is a variety of approach, which I believe actually is a good thing, is providing, because it increases our learning curve. We learn that much faster, the more variety in the approach, providing we're willing to share lessons learned. And then ultimately, the data. So can you speak to this concept of network of networks?
Yeah.
For example, AACR and Genie.
Right.
A very laudable approach. ASCO's Cancer Link.
Right.
Orion, a coalition of cancer centers. Can you speak to perhaps, and I think I heard it, you saying, what's the job you're trying to do?
Yeah.
When the data is available to address a job. But
right. So what we have found is, you have to first of all know where the data is. So, and this shifts gears a little bit to the work that we started doing up at Harvard Business School under this Kraft endowment. And just to give you the heads up on that, Robert and Jonathan Kraft, who you all know for the New England Patriots, Robert lost his wife Myra to ovarian cancer. Her tumor had been sequenced. They couldn't find a drug fast enough to save her. So they gave the endowment to Harvard Business School with the intent of saying, can business practices actually drive the science faster? They were frustrated that science is exploding, but if you don't have the incentives right, we'll never let the science happen as quickly as it could. And I agreed completely. So when the dean of the business school asked if I would come up and run that initiative, and I realized it was across all cancers, I felt like that was the best thing I could ever be doing, because my identical twin sister had just been diagnosed with breast cancer. My mother had melanoma. My dad had died of kidney cancer. And it just seemed like the best opportunity. what I realized by working across all cancers is that you have to understand where the data is, and nobody was incentivized to actually put together all the data sets. So even when I was at the MMRF, if I wanted to answer a question of, is this drug better than that drug, or should you be on maintenance or should you not, I wasn't sure. Am I going to see Bioportal? Am I going to Orion? Am I going to Flatiron? Or am I going to CancerLink? So one of the first things that we did at the Kraft Initiative was create the data landscape so that anybody and everybody could see where all the data sets are. And then the Harvard Library is actually now in charge, and we can send this all out to everybody, but they're in charge of updating that data landscape so you can see how big are the data sets, are they genomic, what's happening within those data sets, and it allows us all to make better decisions. And then as you go out and you try to answer your questions and you get federated models in, because we're not going to get everybody to give their data to the MMRF. We get that, and we certainly don't want data at the Kraft Initiative. But what you do want is for people to answer the questions, work on the data together, and then share that data as well. And that's kind of the federated model we're trying to build in myeloma. But again, the beauty of working in one cancer is you can go deep and vertical in your models and your business models because it's one cancer. Moving over to my other job up at the Kraft Initiative is to take everything we're learning real time in myeloma and share it with every other cancer. And I think that's where, really the rubber meets the road is how do you take some of these best ideas going on in the various cancers and share them real time? I said to Bill, and I feel badly about this, but for years and years, I gave the academic centers a really hard time because I didn't think that they were sharing data, and I knew it was never a problem with a doctor or a scientist, it was just a system. But then I realized, for the last, 20 years, I've been in my own little multiple myeloma silo because, I was so focused on how do I raise the money, how do I get the programs done, and it was really hard to find the time to reach across the aisle until the Krafts came up with this more innovative approach to philanthropy, saying, if we put the funding, if we give you the resources, and HBS gives you the foundation from which to work, can you get this done? And now I believe we really are pushing collective impact across all cancers up there.
So a network of networks willing to share, and which could even support a federated system, depending on the question. An important thing I think that came out of the moonshot effort in terms of a recommendation, the concept of networks is central. But much of the challenge is if everybody's using different data dictionaries, they can't talk to each other. So I think as we develop these networks of networks, the more we can standardize the data sets, the dictionaries, et cetera, up front, then that should be able to enhance our ability to actually share within the networks. Excellent. So this is about patients. Mm-hmm. And how do we create this ecosystem through this collective impact we're talking about, and then create a process or approach to direct to the patient? Right. How do they directly benefit? We've heard about patients who want to participate in decision making. So how can this collective input address that?
So I personally think the more patients know how important their data is, the more we will get them engaged. So when a patient understands that if you understand your genomics, you understand as much as you possibly can about your disease, you will likely identify the best journey for yourself with your doctor. But they also need to understand that it's your data in context with hundreds and thousands of other patients that allows us to really accelerate the cure. So the more that data sharing happens, the better off we are. In all honesty, many, many patients have no idea that their data is not currently shared. They actually think if you go to the academic center or the doctor that it's automatically going to be shared. So part of what we have to do in this space is to educate the patients so that we can get more patients involved in research, whether it's being accessible to a research program that somebody's trying to answer a question, or whether it's get the patients into the trials. So now what we're doing up at the Kraft Initiative is we've created a direct-to-patient program. And again, we're using collective impact where the shared agenda is basically how can we increase the number of patients that are going to get into research. And we have to make sure, and by building this team, we had to make sure that we found the right team that wanted to be collaborative and reach across sectors. So for the first time, at least for me, we identified 5 organizations. So we're working across the Breast Cancer Foundation, the Prostate Cancer Foundation, Pancreatic, Lung, and MMRF. And for the first time, these organizations are sitting shoulder to shoulder, side by side, opening up every bit of data that they have on their own organizations. How many patients do we have in our data set? How have we coded them? Are they engaging in research? And it's things that we've never, ever taken the time to really talk about. And then we have it run by this amazing woman, Lori Marcus, who is a breast cancer survivor, an MMRF board member, but a direct-to-consumer leader. She has worked at Pepsi, at the Children's Place, at Peloton Bikes. And so she works with us to disrupt all of us in the healthcare sector, to say, if you want to know how patients can give you data, you have to teach them on the value of their data. So we brought in Uber and Rent the Runway and Peloton and Marriott Starwood to help us to understand, how do you keep your consumers engaged by selecting these bite-sized pieces of, give me just this little bit of data, we'll give you more value. You give us more data, we'll give you more value. So now imagine these 5 cancer organizations, once again, a shared agenda, evaluated on metrics, how many patients together can we identify who now are raising their hands that they want to be involved in research. Together, we're all sharing our best practices of, how do you do navigation? Like, do you have call centers? How do you code your patients? But we're also doing market research, and we fielded it in the most efficient way, where 5 cancers put out one market research survey completely on what we consider to be the precision medicine patient journey. How do you know how to get to the right center? How do you know whether you should do FISH testing, any genomic testing? What diagnostic test? Is there a standard of care? Will you share your data? We fielded it in record time for almost nothing, because now we were being efficient and sharing our resources. And now we're working together to build a digital program, Facebook, Twitter, all of those, with an agency to say, we want to all be talking to patients in the same way, to engage them with the same lexicon, to inspire them across all cancers. Because it turns out the similarities are much more than the differences when you start to work directly with patients. So it's really been interesting to see how fast they coalesced, but it's been an amazing, amazing journey to work with them on.
Fabulous. I'm getting the wrap it up, but I have one more question. So we've mentioned multiple stakeholders that we can bring together, who through collective impact will all benefit, but create something even better. Who's lacking? Who's not quite at the table?
I would say revamping the model a little bit. I would do it slightly differently today, and that is, I would take the data, I would reach a level of consensus amongst the full community, meaning the academic centers, the patients, everybody, and say, what are the questions we all together need to answer? Prioritize them, get the right data in, and get that funded. Because what I'm finding today is, it's really hard for us to get the payers in the room, and it's not that they don't want to come, it's just we don't have the right access to all of them. And instead, sometimes what happens is we're all answering questions from the pharma side, but we're not deciding on the questions together. So, you really want to prioritize that focus, create the funds where you're all working together, open the data up so that it can be like a pre-competitive consortium where pharma, the payers, academia, everybody can see it, and then we can drive forward together without having the funding dictate sometimes the direction that we're all going in.
Fabulous, fabulous. Well, thank you, all the sponsors. Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks, Bill.
I've kept my track record. I learned something again. Thank you very much.